The wind whispered through the pines that morning, brushing softly against the worn wooden siding of the cabin. Snow still clung to the shadowed corners of the yard, slowly retreating from the warming April sun. Clara stood at the kitchen window, her hands wrapped around a chipped ceramic mug, the smell of coffee drifting into the silence. Outside, everything was still, except for a single, persistent sound. Scratch, thump, scratch. She froze. There it was again, barely audible over the hum of the old refrigerator. A sound like claws on wood, like something, waiting. Clara set down her mug and walked slowly to the front door, her heart unexpectedly quickening. She didn't expect visitors, hadn't for months, and certainly not this early. She opened the door cautiously, the hinges creaking like a reluctant sigh. At first, she saw nothing. Just the weathered porch, a dusting of melting snow, and beyond it, the forest thick with evergreens. Then, in the corner of her eye of movement, a small shape huddled near the porch steps. Brown. Shivering. Mottled with mud and tiny twigs. Her breath caught. It was a bear cub. Clara didn't move. Neither did the cub. Its big, dark eyes stared back at her, not wild with panic, not growling or baring tiny teeth. Just tired. And scared. It looked no older than a few months. Maybe 15 or 20 pounds, tops. Its fur, once likely soft and plush, was matted from damp earth. Its sides rose and fell with shallow, uneven breaths. And those eyes, those wide, solemn eyes, held something too familiar. Something almost human. Clara took a small step forward. The cub didn't flinch. She stepped again, slower this time, stopping just before the threshold. The cub whimpered faintly and tucked its nose under a paw. Clara's fingers tightened on the doorframe. Logic told her to shut the door, call wildlife control, and pretend none of this was happening. Bears were dangerous, even the little ones. Especially if their mother was nearby. But looking around, there was no sign of anything else. No tracks in the snow. No snapping branches. No echo of heavy breathing in the trees. Just the cub. Alone. Cold. Watching her like it had nowhere else to go. Clara didn't say a word. She walked back inside, grabbed an old flannel blanket from the coat rack, and returned to the porch. Slowly, she folded it and set it down near the edge, close, but not too close, to where the cub lay. Then she poured a bowl of water from the sink and slid it gently across the boards. She backed away, retreating inside, and closed the door with a soft click. From the kitchen, she watched through the window. The cub didn't move for several long minutes. Then, cautiously, it sniffed the air. It crept toward the blanket, sniffed again, and curled up into it with a soft grunt of approval. Its tiny body nearly vanished inside the folds. Later that day, it drank from the bowl. Clara didn't tell anyone. That night, sleep refused to come. She tossed beneath the heavy quilt, staring at the ceiling, haunted not by fear, but by a familiar ache. That look in the cub's eyes had cracked something open inside her, something she'd sealed off for nearly a year. The quiet, unspoken grief she lived with day after day. The emptiness she never dared confront. She rose just after midnight, crept to the window, and saw the cub still curled up in the blanket. Its tiny chest rising and falling. Safe. Alive. The next morning, it was gone. Clara stood on the porch, clutching her coffee again, the air sharper than the day before. She half expected it to have been a dream. But the damp blanket and the missing water said otherwise. And then, 3 days later, it came back. Same time. Same spot. The cub, a little cleaner now, sniffed around the steps as if checking to see if it was still welcome. Clara opened the door without hesitation. This time, she didn't hesitate to place a small plate of sliced apple and a few drops of honey near the edge of the porch. The cub approached slowly, watching her the entire time. It licked the honey clean and sat down beside the blanket like it had never left. And so, the routine began. Every morning around 8:30, the cub would appear. It never tried to come inside. Never growled or roamed. Just waited quietly on the porch, like it belonged there. Clara, still silent, kept feeding it. Fresh fruit. Bits of bread. A dish of water. She even went into town and bought a bag of organic granola, unsure of what cubs were supposed to eat, but hoping it would help. It wasn't just the cub that was healing. Clara started opening her windows again. She took longer walks to the mailbox. She even smiled once, just slightly, when the cub played with a pine cone and rolled off the porch in a flurry of tiny growls and tumbling fur. She didn't name it. Not yet. But she watched it like a mother watches a child she's afraid to love too much. Then, one Saturday morning, Clara's doorbell rang. A voice called from outside, young, bright, and unmistakably familiar. "Aunt Clara. Are you home?" It was Eli, her 7-year-old nephew. She'd forgotten he was coming. He appeared in the doorway with a grin too wide for his face, holding a backpack nearly bigger than he was. Behind him, the cub was already watching. Eli's eyes went wide. "Whoa! Is that a baby bear?" Clara opened her mouth to explain, but nothing came out. Eli crept closer, whispering, "He looks sad. Like he misses somebody." Clara looked at the cub, then at Eli. And for the first time in a long, long while, she didn't feel quite so alone. That morning, a bear cub sat on Clara's porch. A child ran through her kitchen. And the silence that once ruled her world began, ever so gently, to break. Clara sat on the porch steps, arms wrapped around her knees, as Eli crouched just a few feet away from the cub. The boy's excitement was quiet but electric, his eyes wide with wonder, his voice a near whisper. "He's not even scared," Eli said, inching a bit closer. "Can I pet him?" Clara reached out, gently placing a hand on his shoulder. "Not yet, sweetie. He's still wild. He's not a pet." Eli nodded but didn't take his eyes off the cub. "What's his name?" "I didn't give him one," Clara said, her voice hushed. "He just started showing up." Eli tilted his head thoughtfully. "He looks like a penny." Clara chuckled. "Penny?" "Yeah," Eli said with a grin. "It just feels right." And somehow, it did. Penny. The name stuck. From that day on, Penny's visits took on a new rhythm. Eli's weekend stay turned into a week, then two, as spring break stretched on and his parents welcomed the unexpected reprieve. Clara didn't protest. Having Eli around kept the cabin warmer, somehow, brighter. He brought a sense of life that Clara hadn't known she was missing. And Penny was no longer just a mysterious visitor. He was a part of their odd little trio. Eli would sit on the edge of the porch with his sketch pad, drawing pictures of Penny rolling in the grass or sniffing at flowers. Clara would bring out snacks, cut up apples, banana slices, even peanut butter on old crackers. Penny would approach slowly, cautious but curious, and gently nudge the treats closer before devouring them with clumsy enthusiasm. Sometimes, Clara caught herself smiling without realizing it. It had been nearly a year since Noah. A year since everything broke. The memory was never far from her. She had tried to bury it deep, under routines, under silence, under cold walls and locked doors. But Eli didn't let her stay buried. And neither did Penny. One evening, Eli asked her, very simply, "Do you think animals can miss people?" Clara looked up from her tea. "What do you mean?" "Well," Eli said, hesitating, "maybe Penny had a mama. Maybe he's sad like you." The words hit her like a gust of wind, cold and honest. Clara didn't answer right away. She looked at Penny, curled up in the corner of the porch in his blanket, paws twitching slightly in sleep. "I think," she finally said, "that grief isn't just for humans." Eli nodded like he understood. And maybe he did, more than most kids his age. He was always the quiet one. Sensitive. Gentle. The next day, they built Penny a small lean-to near the side of the house. Just a few old boards and a tarp from the shed, but it was enough to shelter him from the wind. They lined it with hay and pine boughs. Penny inspected it cautiously, sniffed around, then plopped down inside like a king settling into his throne. That night, Clara stood by the window, watching Eli and Penny through the glass. The boy had wrapped himself in a blanket and was reading aloud from a children's book, voice animated and expressive, though Penny clearly couldn't understand. Still, the cub listened, ears twitching every so often, head tilted toward the sound. It was the first time Clara had seen something like peace in months. The days passed, and the connection deepened. Clara still didn't let Penny inside the house, but the lines between them began to blur. She found herself looking forward to his visits, worrying when he didn't show up on time, feeling a strange emptiness when he disappeared into the woods for the night. One afternoon, she caught herself humming while making granola bars, stirring in oats and honey, thinking about what Penny might like. That's when a knock came at the door. It was Marla, her neighbor from down the hill. A kind woman with too many cats and a tendency to gossip. "Clara," Marla said, her brow furrowed with concern, "people are talking. They say you've got a bear cub on your porch." Clara hesitated. "I didn't invite him. He just showed up." Marla looked past her, spotting Penny resting under the lean-to. "Clara, that's dangerous. Bears are unpredictable, even babies. You shouldn't be feeding it. You know the law." "I'm not trying to keep him," Clara said quietly. "He's just here." Marla sighed, pulling her shawl tighter. "Just be careful. If word gets to fish and wildlife, they won't be gentle." When Marla left, Clara closed the door and leaned against it, heart pounding. She'd known this moment would come. But somehow, it felt like a threat to something sacred. That night, she didn't sleep. She remembered the last time she'd felt this kind of fear, the night they found Noah's backpack by the lake, and nothing else. The waiting. The not knowing. The final, unbearable truth. Penny had opened a wound she thought she'd sealed forever. But he'd also given her something back, the ache of caring. The tremble of hope. She couldn't lose that again. The next morning, Eli found her in the yard, building a simple signpost from driftwood and nails. "What's that for?" he asked. Clara looked at him, her eyes tired but steady. "It's for Penny. So people know he's not a threat. Just lost. Like us." They painted it together. A small wooden sign, nailed into the ground near the porch. "He's just passing through. Please be kind." As they hammered in the last nail, Penny appeared from the woods, head low, fur damp from morning dew. He padded toward them slowly, sniffed the base of the sign, and let out a low, soft sound that was almost like a sigh. Eli looked up at Clara. "Do you think he knows we're trying to help?" Clara knelt beside him, wrapping an arm around his shoulder. "I think he knows we care. And sometimes, that's enough." The cub nestled back into his spot under the lean-to. Eli sat beside him. And for the first time in a long time, Clara felt the quiet not as a burden, but as a kind of peace. Not everything broken had to stay broken. Not every goodbye meant the end. Clara awoke to the sound of tires crunching gravel. It was early, just after dawn, and the sky was painted in sleepy shades of gray and blue. She pulled on her flannel jacket and stepped out onto the porch, instinctively looking for Penny. The cub wasn't there yet. But two figures were, standing near a white pickup with a faded State Park logo on the door. "Morning, ma'am," one of the men said. He was tall, in his late 40s, with a thick beard and a notepad in hand. The other was younger, maybe 30, wearing mirrored sunglasses and holding a tablet. "I'm Ranger Dawson. This is Officer Lyle. We've received reports about a bear cub frequenting this property." Clara's heart began to pound. "He's just a baby," she said quietly. "He comes and goes. I don't keep him here." "Are you feeding him?" Officer Lyle asked, not unkindly, but firmly. Clara hesitated. "Some fruit. Water. Nothing cooked. Nothing processed." The men exchanged a look. "Ma'am, we understand you're trying to help," Dawson said, softening his voice, "but feeding wildlife, especially large predators like bears, is illegal in Montana. Even if it's just a cub." "He's alone," Clara said. "He has no mother." "We've been tracking him," Dawson replied. "There have been other sightings. And honestly, you've kept him alive this long. But it can't go on. If he gets too comfortable around humans, it'll be dangerous, for him and for the community." Clara's breath caught. "What are you saying?" "We'll need to relocate him. Safely. To a sanctuary in Missoula. He'll be cared for, and if he's healthy enough, maybe even released when he's older. But he can't stay here." She nodded slowly, eyes stinging. "Can I say goodbye?" Dawson gave a quiet nod. Of course. But don't delay. We'll be back in a few days. As the truck pulled away, Clara stood frozen. The silence was heavier than usual. When Penny appeared that morning, trudging out of the tree line with damp fur and sleepy eyes, Clara had to turn away for a moment. She couldn't let him see her cry. She wouldn't let anyone see that, not again. Later that day, Eli returned from town with his parents. Clara broke the news gently. They're taking him away? Eli's voice cracked. They have to, she whispered, kneeling beside him. He's not safe here. Not forever. Eli looked at Penny, who was now resting in the corner of the porch. But he chose us. I know, Clara said. And maybe that's what makes this so hard. The next morning, Penny didn't come. Clara waited for hours, checking the woods, scanning the trail, her chest tight with dread. Eli walked the perimeter of the house over and over, calling Penny's name in a hopeful whisper. By noon, there was still no sign. By evening, the panic set in. Clara grabbed a flashlight, her boots, and her old canvas coat. Eli, stay here. I'm going to look for him. I'm coming too, Eli said, already pulling on his jacket. He's my friend. Clara hesitated, then nodded. She couldn't deny the truth in his eyes. They moved into the forest, deeper than either of them had gone since Penny arrived. Trees loomed tall and bare in the early spring air, branches skeletal against the dimming sky. The snow had mostly melted, but wet leaves and slush made the ground slick and treacherous. They found tracks, a scatter of small paw prints leading toward the old fire road. Clara followed them instinctively, flashlight beam bouncing between tree trunks. Her mind raced with worry. What if he was hurt? What if someone else had found him first? They moved in silence for over a mile. Then Eli stopped. Did you hear that? He whispered. Clara held her breath. There was a low, pained whimper. Not human. She turned her light toward the sound. Behind a cluster of brush, Penny lay curled in a ditch, one hind leg twisted unnaturally beneath him. Beside his foot was a coil of rusty wire, barbed and sharp. A snare. Probably left behind by some hunter long ago. Oh my God, Clara gasped. Penny. She dropped to her knees, reaching carefully toward the trap. Penny growled weakly, more out of fear than aggression. It's okay, she whispered. I've got you. I've got you, baby. Eli crouched beside her, his little face pale. Is he gonna die? No, she said fiercely. Not today. Her hands trembled as she worked the trap open. The wire had cut deep, but not through bone. Still, it would take time to heal, and time was something they no longer had. She scooped him into her arms, heavier than she remembered, his body warm and trembling. His breath came in short, shallow puffs. We're going home, she whispered, over and over, as she trudged through the trees, Eli close at her side. It took nearly an hour to get back. When they finally reached the cabin, Clara laid Penny on a blanket in the living room, breaking her own rule about animals indoors without a second thought. She cleaned the wound gently with warm water and iodine, while Eli fed him drops of honey from a spoon. Penny didn't resist. He just rested his head on Clara's thigh and closed his eyes. Clara called the sanctuary that night. I found him, she said quietly into the phone. He's hurt. But he's going to make it. I need help. They arranged to send someone in 3 days. Those next 3 days were a kind of magic and mourning. Penny stayed inside, curled up in his blanket, his paw bandaged, his belly full. Eli read to him. Clara played soft music on the radio. The house, once so quiet, pulsed with life. On the final morning, Clara sat with Penny in her lap, brushing his fur gently. You saved me too, you know, she whispered. When the wildlife team arrived, Clara met them at the door with Penny already bundled in a fleece-lined crate. There were no dramatic goodbyes. Just quiet tears, soft nods, and the unspoken understanding that this had been more than an accident. This had been a crossing of paths meant to happen. As the truck drove away, Eli slipped his hand into Clara's. Will he remember us? Clara looked at the van disappearing into the woods. Maybe not with his mind. But I think, with his heart. Always. The porch felt emptier than ever. But for the first time since Noah's passing, Clara didn't feel lost in the emptiness. She felt found. The cabin was quieter now. After the sanctuary team left with Penny, the silence returned, thicker than before. Not the cold silence that followed Noah's death, but something softer. Like the moment after a storm, when the trees are still dripping and the world exhales. Clara stood on the porch the next morning, her coffee untouched, the steam curling into the crisp mountain air. The blanket Penny used still lay in the corner, indented with his shape. Beside it, Eli had left his sketchbook open on a page titled Penny's Big Goodbye. A small drawing of the cub waving from the back of a truck filled the center of the page. In the corner, a stick figure Clara smiled gently with one hand raised. She pressed her palm over her heart and breathed deeply. Letting go had never come easy to her. Not when she buried her parents, not when she handed off Noah's favorite toys to charity, and certainly not now. But it was time. Inside, Eli sat cross-legged on the floor, cutting out shapes from construction paper. He was making a goodbye card, full of hearts and honey pots. "We can send it to Penny, right?" he asked, hopeful. "We'll find a way," Clara said. "We'll send it to the sanctuary." Eli beamed. "I want him to know we're okay." Clara watched him for a moment, feeling the truth in that sentence settle inside her. "We're okay." That evening, Clara made a call. It was to a place she'd been too afraid to contact for over a year, the town's grief support group. They met twice a month at the community center just off Main Street. Clara had seen the flyers dozens of times, stuffed them in drawers, thrown them away. This time, she asked for a seat. She hung up and stared at the wall, surprised at herself. She didn't want to be the woman who never left her porch again. And Penny, in his own strange, gentle way, had shown her the way out. The next day, Clara took Eli to the park. He ran along the trail, darting between trees, his laughter echoing through the woods. Clara followed slowly, eyes drifting toward the lake in the distance. It had been a year since she stood there. Noah's favorite place. When they reached the shore, Eli didn't say anything. He just walked to the edge and skipped a stone across the surface. Clara sat beside him. "He would have liked Penny," Eli said quietly. Clara nodded. "They both had a way of sneaking into your heart." "I wish he was still here," Eli whispered. "Me too," she said. "Every day." They sat in silence for a long time, watching the ripples fade. Later, they returned to the cabin and decided to make a memorial, not just for Noah, but for Penny, too. A space of remembrance and healing. They gathered river stones and painted each one, a paw print, a honey jar, a bare face, a child's smile. They built a little circle beneath the pine tree by the porch and set them there, side by side. It was their way of saying thank you. A week later, a letter arrived from the Missoula Sanctuary. "Dear Clara and Eli, thank you for trusting us with Penny. He's adjusting beautifully. Though he's still healing from his injury, he's eating well, gaining weight, and growing stronger every day. Our team has placed him in a special enclosure with 2 other orphan cubs around his age. They're already playing together and forming bonds. We've also given him a new name, Hope, though we'll always honor the one you gave him. When he's old enough, we'll begin preparations to reintroduce him into the wild. Until then, he's safe. Thank you for your kindness. You've given this cub a second chance at life. With gratitude. The Rocky Mountain Wildlife Sanctuary Team." Clara read the letter aloud while Eli listened, wide-eyed. "He has friends?" Eli asked. "He does," Clara said with a smile. "And he's going to grow up wild and free, just like he was meant to." Eli jumped up and ran to his sketchpad. He began drawing again, Penny, no, Hope, climbing a tree, playing with other cubs, surrounded by mountains. Clara framed the letter and hung it on the wall above the fireplace. It didn't erase the past. Nothing could. But it was a marker, like a stone on a trail, signaling that healing had taken root. Later that week, Clara visited the sanctuary's website. They had a section for volunteers, and without thinking too hard, she filled out the form. A month later, she made her first drive to Missoula in nearly 2 years. The sanctuary was nestled in the valley, surrounded by tall fences and wide spaces filled with trees and rocky hills. Clara met with a staff member named Jenna, who welcomed her warmly and walked her through the enclosures. When they reached the juvenile bear area, Jenna paused and smiled. "You want to see Hope?" Clara's heart thudded. "Yes." Jenna led her to a quiet section where 3 cubs were tumbling through the grass. One of them, rounder now, healthier, was unmistakably Penny. Or rather, Hope. He didn't recognize her, of course. He was too busy wrestling another cub over a stick. But just seeing him, safe, strong, thriving, was more than enough. Clara watched for nearly an hour, then left a little drawing Eli had made in the visitor box. She didn't need to go back every week. Or even every month. Hope didn't belong to her. Not really. But she had been part of his story. And he had been part of hers. That evening, Clara and Eli sat on the porch, sipping warm cider under a sky full of stars. The night was still, but it no longer felt empty. Eli looked up. "Do you think he remembers the porch?" "I think he remembers how it made him feel," Clara said. "Safe. Loved." Eli grinned. "Like a home." Clara nodded. "Exactly like that." The wind rustled through the trees. Somewhere far away, an owl hooted. Life went on. And so did they. 1 year had passed. The mountain wind still whispered through the trees, the lake still mirrored the sky like it held its own silent thoughts, but everything else felt different. Clara stood on her porch, a warm mug of tea in hand, wrapped in a wool shawl Eli had insisted on buying her for her birthday. It was hand-stitched by a local artisan and covered in little bear prints. She didn't wear it for the pattern. She wore it because Eli gave it to her with a smile that said, "You're okay now." And she was. Inside, Eli was finishing a school project. He'd been asked to write about something that changed his life. His report, printed in large, neat letters, was titled, "The Bear Who Helped My Aunt Find Her Heart Again." His teacher had emailed Clara to say she cried reading it. On the fireplace mantel sat a small framed photo, a shot of Eli holding up one of his drawings while standing in front of a sanctuary enclosure. Just behind the fence, the unmistakable brown shape of a young bear, bigger, stronger, looked directly at the camera. Hope. Not Penny anymore. But never forgotten. The letter updates from the sanctuary came every few months now. The latest said Hope would likely be released into the wild that fall, once the staff felt confident he could thrive on his own. He had grown into a strong, clever bear who led the others in play and, surprisingly, looked out for the weaker cubs in his group. "He's a protector," the letter said. "We think someone taught him how to care." Clara had smiled through tears reading that line. She didn't visit Hope often, only twice in the past year, but each time, she saw a little less of the fragile cub who once slept on her porch and a little more of the wild creature he was always meant to be. And that was enough. Eli had adjusted, too. His drawings still featured bears, but now they also had dragons, rocket ships, and wild landscapes. Hope had become part of his story, but not the whole story. And that was healthy. Clara, for her part, had started doing something she never thought she would again, living fully. She had returned to her work at the local library part-time. She volunteered at the sanctuary when she could. She even hosted a grief support workshop every other Sunday for people like her, those who had lost something they thought they could never survive without. She didn't have all the answers. She just had the story. The one about a bear cub on a porch. And what followed. One morning, just before summer, Eli found something unusual at the edge of the woods. A small, round stone painted sky blue, with a black paw print at its center. He brought it to Clara. "Do you think someone left this for us?" She smiled and turned it over. On the back, written in marker. "He made it. So can you?" Clara didn't know who had left it. Maybe someone from the group. Maybe a sanctuary visitor. Maybe a stranger who heard their story. She set the stone among the others in the memory circle, now grown to nearly a dozen. Each rock held a name, a drawing, or a quiet reminder of something once lost but not forgotten. That night, Clara and Eli sat outside under the stars, as they often did now. "Do you ever wonder where Hope is?" Eli asked. "All the time," Clara said. "But not in a sad way. In the way you wonder about a friend on a great adventure." Eli leaned his head on her shoulder. I think he's doing big things. Clara smiled. I think he already has. She thought back to the early days, the first scratch at the door, the wide, quiet eyes, the way the cub had arrived exactly when she needed him most. Not to replace what was lost, but to remind her that healing wasn't about forgetting. It was about remembering differently. Remembering that love doesn't disappear. It just changes shape. The next week, Clara stood before a small group gathered at the community center. Most were strangers, eyes red, voices quiet. Some had lost children, others partners, others pets that were more like family. She told them her story, not just the loss, but what came after. The bear on the porch. The way a child and a cub had reminded her how to feel again. She ended with this. Grief is like a wild animal. It can feel unpredictable, terrifying, too big to face. But sometimes, if we're lucky, a different kind of wild finds us. One that helps us carry the weight. One that sits beside us on the porch, not to fix us, but to remind us we're not alone. There wasn't a dry eye in the room. She didn't offer platitudes. She offered truth. And that was more than enough. Later, as she packed up, someone slipped a small envelope into her hand. It held a photo of another bear cub, different, but familiar. The note read, "Your story saved mine." Clara walked home in the fading light, the envelope pressed to her heart. She had no idea who had written the note. But she knew exactly what it meant. That night, back on the porch, she lit a small candle and placed it in the center of the memory stones. The flame flickered gently in the breeze. Eli joined her a few minutes later with 2 mugs of cider. He raised his cup. To Penny. Clara clinked hers softly against his. To Hope. They sat in silence, watching the stars blink open one by one. Sometimes, healing doesn't come with fanfare. Sometimes, it pads quietly up your porch steps with muddy paws and soft eyes, asking for nothing but a place to rest. And sometimes, what you thought was the end of your story is really just the start of someone else's. If this story touched your heart, we invite you to stay with us. Every day, we share stories of resilience, compassion, and the quiet ways animals transform our lives. This is Paw Prints and Stories, where healing finds its voice. We'll be here tomorrow, with another tale that might just change your day. Until then, take care of your heart. It's stronger than you think.